Hello you fine folks and welcome to the Ruiboss channel. It's time for another wacky World War II episode and hopefully you don't get airsick because today we're talking about planes. But not just any planes. Today we're going over 10 of the wackiest, weirdest, most comment-worthy planes of the World War II era. When the war began at the end of the 1930s, powered flight had only been a reality for less than 40 years. Warplanes had been tested and proven in the First World War, and with the renewed onset of global conflict, all of the big players were rapidly developing the aviation science. Development means experimentation, and experimentation means dang weird ideas.
The new weapon you ordered.
But between this intro and the planes on this list, there's a bit too much stalling going on, so let's get to the thing. We're gonna start off our list with something that's not technically a plane, but it's close enough to make the list, the Antonov A-40 flying tank. The Russians were exploring ways to quickly deliver fighting vehicles to combat zones, such as carrying a light tank underneath a plane and dropping it at a low height, but they wanted something more efficient. Aircraft designer Oleg Antonov came to the rescue with the idea of creating glider wings that would attach to a T-60 light tank. The concept was just to air tow this contraption to the area of combat, let go, and then let the glider come to a nice, easy stop, still with the crew inside so that they wouldn't be separated on a separate drop, and then they could just detach the glider wings and your little combat tank would be ready to go. The Soviets claimed that a test run of the process took place, but historians are skeptical if they actually did so, and this photograph is actually a fabrication of the Antonov factory. In any case, the project was scrapped. So note that these first 4 entries are all Soviet designs because they had some pretty wacky ideas during the war, and number 2 is no exception, the Zveno project, aka the Flying Aircraft Carrier. The concept? Take a large aircraft like the Tupolev TB-1 or TB-3 and attach 2 to 5 fighter aircraft to its wings and fuselage. The project saw many different variations with various motherships and parasite aircraft, but most often the Tupolev TB-3 was used as the host aircraft. The project was devised with various goals, namely getting fighter aircraft to operation zones beyond their normal range, but the fighters could also serve as extra engine power for a bomber that had an especially heavy payload and it just couldn't get off the ground. The most successful configuration was the Zveno SPB, which consisted of a TB-3 with 2 I-16 fighters attached under its wings, each carrying a pair of heavy dive bombs. The Zveno SPB performed a fair amount of successful combat missions towards the beginning of the war, but as the war progressed, only 5 were actually really produced and delivered, and the resources that would have gone towards that project was siphoned away towards more conventional and proven forms of combat. Our next entry is a mouthful of letters, the NIAI RK-1, the Telescoping Wing Plane. This was a prototype aircraft that was designed to take advantage of a variable wing shape. Basic wing philosophy is that the more surface area, the more lift you have, but then you also have more drag, meaning you don't have as much of a maximum top speed. If you have an aircraft that can change shape, however, you can switch between lift and speed as needed. This is why the more modern F-14 was designed with variable sweep wings. The Russians had this idea a long time ago though, and they produced an airframe that could use hydraulics to deploy and retract wing segments from the fuselage. Sadly, the story goes that Stalin himself took such an interest in the project that he demanded that they only use the most powerful engine available, the M-106. The thing is, the M-106 was trash, and since it was so unreliable, the prototype RK-1 never actually took to the skies and just sat in a workshop, warehouse, whatever, for the whole war. Dang it, Stalin! Our final entry for the Soviets is very Soviet indeed, the ANT-20 propaganda plane. The ANT-20, known as the Maxim Gorky, was a massive plane and was the largest ever built when it was introduced in 1934. It was designed to be the flagship of a propaganda squadron, and its fuselage and wings were decked out to house a printing press, a library, a powerful radio, a photo lab, and a capacity for 72 passengers. This plane seemed a bit cursed though. During a demonstration flight, an escort fighter collided with the Maxim Gorky, resulting in a crash that killed 45 people. A replacement was later produced, but during another flight, the pilot let a passenger take his seat for a moment, and apparently that passenger disengaged the autopilot. The plane took a nosedive and crashed, and killed everyone on board. And now it's time for weird American aircraft. Let's talk about the Vought-173, the Flying Pancake. Lost opportunity for the Germans to follow up with the Luftwaffe, just saying. The Flying Pancake was an experiment into the realm of an all-wing design, of which a more modern implementation would be the B-2 stealth bomber. The lack of wingtips reduced drag, and the small wing area resulted in higher durability and maneuverability. While the plane proved to be quite durable and was highly resistant to stalling, it had difficulty achieving level flight and ultimately ultimately just served as a stepping stone in aviation research. Its legacy was continued with the Vought XF-5U, a larger and heavier version, but the project was abandoned a few years after the war in favor of other ventures. Next up, we have the Douglas XB-42 Mixmaster, a much snazzier looking aircraft. In the second half of the war, the US was developing the famous B-29 Superfortress, but was intrigued at the proposal of the XB-42, which might offer the same range as a B-29, but in a much cheaper, smaller, and speedier package. The Mixmaster had an unorthodox approach to propulsion, featuring two counter-rotating propellers at the back of the plane. This was a neato idea, but it meant that if the pilots had to bail, they'd risk falling right into a wood chipper. To this end, explosives were placed in the tail of the plane that would allow the pilots to blow off the propellers before bailing. The US Army Air Forces had high hopes at the beginning, but the plane didn't prove to handle particularly well, and this quest for speed proved unnecessary with the advent of jet power? Speaking of planes with propellers in the wrong spot, our number 7 is the Bell YFM-1 Airacuda. I'm guessing that's supposed to be a play on Barracuda, but I cannot confirm. The Airacuda was designed as a heavy fighter and was touted as a bomber destroyer. It was fitted with 4 machine guns, a 37mm cannon, and it could carry a small bomb load. However, when testing began, the plane had a great deal of flaws. Despite being presented as a bomber destroyer, it flew slower than most bombers, and it was shown to be too unmaneuverable to dogfight. Its 37mm cannon had a short aerial range to be effective, and its bomb load was too small to be of any use in a bombing mission. So basically useless as a combat aircraft. Another big issue was that instead of its own engines, the plane implemented a generator that powered a complex electrical grid of systems. If that power unit went down, which it often did, all systems would shut down, requiring a frantic manual reset to get everything back online. Not a situation I'd like to find myself in. For our final 3 entries, we're going to see what Germany was getting up to. Number 8 is the Blumenvoss BV-141, a plane with an asymmetrical design, the Millennium Falcon of World War II. The BV-141 was designed as a reconnaissance aircraft, which is why the cockpit is shoved over to the side where the propeller won't impede the pilot's view. What's funny is that this plane was inspired by a design competition for a reconnaissance plane, but Blumenvoss wasn't even invited to participate. They wanted to make a plane anyway and came up with this funky thing. Despite the odd design, test pilots stated that the plane handled quite well. However, this plane used the same engine as the Focke-Wulf 190, which is in high demand in the war, and the BV-141 didn't get to full production. Our next to last entry is literally 2 planes in one, the HE-111Z, which was just 2 HE-111s smashed together. In Germany, why make one big plane when you can just smash the 2 smaller planes together? The original purpose of the plane was to tow large gliders such as the ME-321, but later variants were planned that could serve as heavy bombers or long-range reconnaissance aircraft. 2 twin-engine HE-111s were joined together at the wing, with the 5th engine being added in the middle for additional thrust. The pilot operated solely out of the left fuselage, with 6 other crew members being placed in either the left or right fuselage. Test pilots spoke well of these machines, and they indeed had a strong load capacity, but they saw very limited service during the war. For our final entry on this list of funky planes, let's have a look at the German Mistel program. A Mistel, referring to mistletoe, which is a parasitic plant, was a large unmanned plane filled with explosives that was attached to the underside of a smaller control aircraft. The smaller aircraft, a fighter, would fly its load to a target, detach the drone as a massive missile, and then return home as a functioning fighter. Approximately 250 of these composite aircraft were produced, most of which were consisted of a modified Ju-88 bomber as the Mistel and an FW-190 as the fighter. The Ju-88s would have their entire crew compartment replaced with a massive shaped charge, making for a truly menacing flying bomb. However, the combat results seemed to be mixed, which may be considered a failure considering how much manpower was dedicated to the project. And that finishes our 10. Comment below which of these planes you would have wanted to see in operation. Thank you guys for watching, consider liking if this was of interest to you, and do the subscribe if you'd like to see more Wacky World War II videos in the future. I'll see you guys in the next video. Ruibas out.